One thing, and then want to ask you a question, Yaron. So on the Rushdie and connecting it to the libertarians, you cannot paint. I mean, you can, but it would not be true to paint the Rushdie affair as like this is interference in their countries and in the Middle East. So this is a Western writer publishing for Westerners, and they put a bounty on his head and say that we don't permit this. And if you guys permit this, we're going to assassinate you and your publishers and people involved. And to view that as, oh, if we would just get out of the Middle East and so something like this wouldn't happen. It's again, the libertarians, there's a real strain that is, you could put it pragmatist, but it's really anti-ideology. They're against the idea that ideas matter. And so when Alon was saying there's a vested interest, they have a vested interest in trying to show that ideas are irrelevant. And so their ideology, and so no, it's all about economics and you're interfering with what they're trying to do. And they love freedom and you're here occupiers and that's all, I mean, it's BS.
So to what extent is that the same as the left? Because that sounds almost Marxist, right? It's all economics and it's all stuff like that.
Yeah, I think this in significant part, not in whole, but in significant part comes from Rothbard. And he, in his later years, maybe not just later years, but is enamored in various ways of the left. And he's anti-American in the way the left is. You get now left libertarians and so on, but he's one of the people pushing that kind of alliance. And it's not an accident that there's real ideological similarities between Rothbard and Marxist and sort of the new left as well. But so that argument, you could translate it to Israel and say, if Israel would just leave people alone, the rest of their neighbors would leave them alone. And like, what's the response to that?
Well, I mean, first, I think that's exactly what they say, right? So this is not hypothetical. That's exactly what the left and many libertarians actually say about Israel. It's all Israel's fault. And if only they left alone. And of course, one of the reasons Israel has almost no left, capital L left, particularly when it comes to kind of foreign policy, military issues, is because nobody in Israel believes that, right? I mean, even the leftists in Israel realize that you can't just roll over, right? So the whole political spectrum in Israel when it comes to defense, to the extent that there's a political spectrum, right? It starts in the center, it goes right. There's no complete appeasement. Let's just lay down everything. There's one small political party that's affiliated with that. Everything else is run by generals who are very real and realistic. But yeah, there is this sense on the left and in the libertarian movement that everything's America's fault. And I think it's motivated by the fact that America is actually, relatively speaking, a successful country, and therefore flies in the face of the idea that anarchy is the only solution. That is, life is too good. They have to, in a sense, undermine it constantly in order to present this anarchist alternative. But there is a real hatred of America and motivated by motivated by a variety of different reasons. But it's shocking. And it was certainly shocking at 9/11 to see how many people, I mean, the names we were called by the libertarians. I mean, they were worse than the leftists, worse than anybody in terms of attacking the Iron Man Institute with regard to what we were proposing, the action being taken.
I think it's worth just saying something, if we can rewind to the first few days and months after 9/11. One thing that stunned me was there were prominent intellectuals on what you would call the left, who call themselves on the left, who came out and effectively said, yeah, we had it coming. And it wasn't exactly the Ron Paul perspective, but it was very similar. And it wasn't one or two, it was a chorus. And there was enough of them that you could say, this is a really disgusting perspective. And I think that I read that as there was a shared aim here of this takes America down a few notches, and they were sad, they were happy about that, and in that sense, it was a way for them to gloat at America's suffering or the suffering of Americans. And I wonder about people who have this attitude, who think of themselves as on the side of liberty. Mm-hmm. Why do you care about liberty? Why do you care about freedom? Is it because, how does that integrate with you want to see America brought down? I mean, if there's one place where liberty actually still exists in a significant degree, you need to think about how this fits together with your view. And just one other, just like a footnote, if I'm allowed to do that on a radio show. Footnote is, I mean, I'm critical of the view. I reject the view that American foreign policy is the primary or even main explanation for what the Islamists are doing. I think the main explanation is what we've been saying. It's an ideologically driven movement rooted in Islam with certain political aims. But I want to just make clear, it's not as if American foreign policy was smart or intelligible or coherent. And I think it's important. Part of what I've been talking about when we were tracing the road to 9/11 and the incoherence and the pragmatism of American policy, all of that is, we're highly critical of American foreign policy. If you think about Dr. Peikoff's essay that you mentioned, we should be good to talk a bit more about that. It starts with 50 years of American appeasement. And in the first few paragraphs in the Middle East have led to this. And the first few paragraphs are about how this is a long-standing problem, that American foreign policy is a policy in scare quotes. It is not really coherent. You can't really say that there's clear goals or priorities or values here. So I think there is a problem with American foreign policy, but it's not the one that you hear from libertarians or from nihilist leftists. It's that it's not coherent. It's not concerned with America's actual self-interest.
Yes.
And there's a vacuum where there should be some conception of that. So I just that's a long footnote, but.
Yeah. And to the extent that we're talking about the road to 9/11, I mean, Leonard Peikoff, when he starts 50 years of appeasement, is really in the Middle East, referring back to the deals we made with the Saudis to protect them at all costs, really going back to World War II. And then the fact that we did nothing as Iran and then Saudi Arabia and then the rest of the Muslim world or the Middle East nationalized, which is another word for saying, stole the property rights of American and other Western countries' oil, and the fact, and if you really want a key event around that, I've talked about this on the show in the past, in 1956 Suez Canal crisis, where it was the Eisenhower administration, right? The French and the British were the tough guys, and it's the Eisenhower administration that forced them to retreat and succumb to Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal, with the hope, again, this goes to the pragmatism Ankur was talking about, with the hope that would convince Nasser to be a friend of the United States. And of course, within 6 months, he cuts a deal with the Soviet Union to arm him and to build the big dam and to become, and he becomes a satellite basically of the Soviets. So it backfires in the face of the Eisenhower administration almost immediately. So let's talk a little bit about the aftermath, because we've gone an hour and we haven't even talked about what happens after.
Yeah, so can I just give a summary of
Sure.
I mean, part of the reason we've been talking a lot about the lead up to 9/11 is that if you have an awareness of what ideologies mean, how they inspire people, what it looks like to oppose them, and what it looks like to appease them, that 9/11 was not foreseeable is like completely wrong. It was, you could see the growing appeasement going on, that you should have been expecting an attack and an escalating attack, because that's what the history actually shows. If you can think of it in an integrated way, driven by ideological factors. So part of what, for kind of our perspective at ARI, was a little startled. It was the kind of paralysis, and it's like, who can make any sense of this? And it should have been, and certainly from our leading thinkers and government officials, and so from the leadership of the country, it should have been, yeah, we could see this coming. And the fact that nobody could indicated such an ideological bankruptcy. So I think part of the reason at ARI that we focused a lot on this is the awareness that nobody is going to say anything halfway decent on this because they don't know and don't really want to think clearly about what is going on. And they're taking it as like this is an attack out of the blue, which is not true at all.
And to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize. I know this is difficult. Can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality which has so far been believed impossible, namely a morality not based on faith.
On faith.
Not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason, a morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
All right. All right.
Now, may I define what my morality is?
All right.
Because this is merely an introduction. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
All right, before we go on, reminder, please like the show. We've got 163 live listeners right now, 30 likes. That should be at least 100. I figure at least 100 of you actually like the show. Maybe there are like 60 of the Matthews out there who hate it. But at least the people who are liking it, you know, I want to see a thumbs up. There you go. Start liking it. I want to see that go to 100. All it takes is a click of a thing, whether you're looking at this. And you know, the likes matter. It's not an issue of my ego. It's an issue of the algorithm. The more you like something, the more the algorithm likes it. So, you know, and if you don't like the show, give it a thumbs down. Let's see your actual views being reflected in the likes. But if you like it, don't just sit there. Help get the show promoted. Of course, you should also share. And you can support the show at JeronBrooksShow.com/support, or on Patreon or Subscribestar or Locals, and show your support for the work, for the value hopefully you're receiving from this. And of course, don't forget, if you're not a subscriber, even if you just come here to troll, or even if you're here like Matthew to defend Marx, then you should subscribe, because that way you'll know when to show up. You'll know what shows are on, when they're on. You'll get notified, right? So, yes, like, share, subscribe, support. Like, share, subscribe, support. There you go. Easy. Do one or all of those, please.